So again, once you got your yellow throat hackle tied in, go ahead and tie in a brown. Now in terms of barb length, what I usually try to do is I try to get the middle of my feather that I'm tying in to have the barbs to be about the same length. And I try to find uniform length ones, ones that don't have much taper for my throats, so that way I can put a few more wraps on without it getting dramatically larger hackle sizes. And then that way, when you wrap it on there, your last, maybe wrap or so, it's going to be just a hair longer than your previous throat. So that way you get kind of a bit of a taper built into the hackle. So once you get it tied off, put down a few good wraps to hold it in place. And then I kind of get in there and I split the fibers out over the body. So that way it's ready and prepared for the wing to come in. Another thing I tend to try to do, anytime I'm tying off a material, when I'm tying in hand, I always tug on the stem a little bit of whatever I'm tying off that way to tighten it up, because it always seems like everything wants to come loose when you're tying in hand. So just give it a good tug before you cut it off and tighten up your thread. And then prepare a tie or cover the butts that are left from the tie off and prepare your fly for your wing. Alright, now we're going to start preparing the wing. This has 3 different cock pheasant body feathers in the wing. So I just selected ones that are appropriate for the size of the hook and are close to the depiction in Favorite Flies. And I start by just stripping all the fluff off the bottom of the feathers, pretty much right up to the actual feather part. You can also put in your Z-bends at this point. You just pretty much you put 2 notches in the stem. One, if you're looking at the near side wing, you'll put it on the underside closest to the feather, and then another one on top of the feather stem just in front of it, so that way you create a little Z. And then what that does is it allows you to get up and over the body. Like I said before, though, I try to get it so I don't really have to use those unless is absolutely necessary. So now we got the 3 feathers kind of ready to go, so just stack them and make sure that it's pleasing. Obviously you want to try to make sure that they all are about the same size and shape, and what I try to shoot for is I try to take them from both sides of the body and from the edges of the feathers. That way they have the natural curvature in them, which also will mimic the shape of the hook and will help to add some shape to your fly. If you take the center ones, they're just kind of shapeless and they're a little more awkward to work with, at least in my opinion. So then measure them up, and you can see how huge those feathers were from the bird that I took. I have a monster pheasant skin. So I'm just measuring them out and then get an idea where you want them to sit and the shape that you want. And you can just take them and strap them right on there and have them go vertical, or you can take them and you can trim the underside of the feathers, so that way they'll sit lower against the body, and you won't get as much folding from that as well. If you do decide to trim the underside of the feathers, you want to get the idea where you want to cut it, and then as you're cutting it, you want to draw your scissors back. And I'm not sure what exactly that does, but it seems to help kind of, it doesn't create such a flat line and I think it kind of feathers the cut a little bit more, so that way you can lick your fingers and you can stroke the underside of the feather, and it will help to marry those the cut strips back, and it creates more of a natural look, like that's the actual shape of the feather rather than having just a blunt straight cut across it. So tying on a feather wing in hand is a little tricky. Just, really the only word of advice I can give you is to tie it on and then make sure that your stems are sitting side by side and right on top of the shank. Especially with this main wing, this is like one of the most crucial points, because if that's not sitting right, then the rest of the fly is not going to be sitting right. So make sure that's sitting vertical and even with the rest of the world before you go on to the next step. And then, I just put the feathers in place and work the stems where I want them to be, and pretty much those ones are a little bit on top of the other ones, and so essentially there are two stacks of stems right on top of each other. And then just I put them both on and strap them on there. Tweak the stems as needed just to get them to sit right. And if they're not sitting right, just take them off and try them again. Again, make sure everything's even with the world. For some reason, I just decided to do those one at a time. That stem kind of sat down in between the two other stems. So the main wing is on the bottom, the second wing is right on, pretty much on the top of that one, and then the third one runs in between those two. Once I get those on, I really put a lot of good wraps on those. Don't want them going anywhere. And I'm really tightening down on that thread as well, trying to make sure they're not going to wiggle. Alright, and then now for the quote-unquote horns. It's just a couple fibers of red and white goose married up. So I got those married up and then decided it would be about 1,000 times easier to put them on after I trimmed all the stems off. So take your time and cut one stem at a time. Don't try to cut them all at once, and get them up as close as possible. I put a couple of coats of head cement just so those stems wouldn't go anywhere, and I put some very thin head cement on so that way it'd penetrate as far into the head as possible and try to glue all the stems together. You really want to kind of have a plan of attack as you go to wrap these on there, the feather wing on there, because if you do too much, go forward too much, and then when you go to cut your stems, they're going to be sticking out the front. And if you're trying to tie a nice fly, you don't really want a bunch of stems sticking out the front, trim stems anyway. So, make sure you don't go all the way forward with your wraps of thread, and you want to stop a little bit back behind from your head, so that way you can cut them at kind of an angle, and so you can add to the shape of your head. So then I'm just kind of measuring up my horns, my quote unquote horns over the fly. And I ended up actually pinching them and putting a little crinkle in the butts of them, so that way when I was holding the butts, they would be going straight out over the fly, and then the horns would curve up and over the fly. And I tried it one way, didn't work, so then I tried just doing them one at a time, which actually worked out better. And I found it easier to hold them from the front of the head with the stems, and then try to hold it from the wing. And just make sure that they're even. And put your other one on. It's actually how I've started doing my horns on my salmon flies as well, is usually holding them from the front. And if any of them start getting pulled over to the side too much, just tweak them back up on top of the shank a little bit. And once you get them in place, just go ahead and trim off the butts. I put a little dab of cement there as well, just so they don't get shifted out of place when you start wrapping on them. This was probably one of the trickier parts, was putting the peacock sword over the top. Usually, I should say, it usually is the trickier part. This time it went on incredibly well. Usually this is a really big pain. I just selected two sword fibers that are, pretty much from the exact same size in place of a matched pair of sword feathers. And again, just put a little nub on there, and they went on pretty good. Now I'm just going to switch over to some red tying silk, just for doing the wool head. Just helps prevent any of that primrose yellow from showing through. And that's really, really waxed thread. You want it super sticky for this part. If you would have looked at it, you would actually seen like big old globs of wax on there. Then I'm using some uni wee wool, I believe. It's an acrylic wool. It's really, really, really fine. I like it for doing wool heads. I just trim it off the spool and then fluff it out and dub it on. So if you don't have enough, just unwrap and put a little more on and wrap it back on there. There's a pretty good coat of pretty thick head cement underneath that as well, just so it holds everything in place. And then I just do a double half hitch. So just make a loop and hold it and feed your tag into your thread through there twice. It's kind of a fiddly maneuver if your thread is as waxed as mine is. It just doesn't seem to want to cooperate. But once you get it fed in through there, and that loop goes right behind the wool head, right in front of all the wing material. You want to try to make sure you don't put it back behind any of where the tie-ins for the wing material are, otherwise you'll smash everything down when you tighten it up. But there's the finished fly. Pretty sweet little pattern. Hope you enjoyed it.
I'm helplessly needless and needless to say I owe you. I'm helplessly needless and needless to say